Welcome back, guys. We're in for another new episode, and today's podcast is with Dr. Greg Kelly, who's a naturopathic doctor, and he is the lead formulator for Neurohacker Collective. So he's the grand poobah that sits up at the top and gets down into the trenches with his team and actually designs these amazing, I call them supplement stacks in a bottle, because every formula that these guys come out with is based on what Greg Kelly likes to call a systems approach. So they don't just look at, okay, let's just throw this one supplement at something. What they like to do, and he explains this in the podcast, they like to look at the whole system affecting whatever process they're trying to impact. And we know that the body has lots of different pathways. There's lots of different redundancies. So they try to design these stacks, and they actually do a really good job designing these stacks that go at solving a problem through multiple different pathways, which I think is, well, I mean, it's magic with their stuff. Qualia Mind was the first supplement they came out with. I'm a huge fan. I use it quite often when I have a lot of work to do. And then I'll go through periods when I'll use it for weeks on end. Always taking 2 days off in between, of course, as they like to tell us, because we want to give the receptors a rest. But today we're talking about vision. We're talking about the eyes. We're talking about eye health. We're talking about all of the challenges that have really affected our eyes over the last year and a half. I mean, not just the last year and a half, let's face it, computers, too much screen time has been a thing in society for a long time, but definitely the last year and a half has put extra pressure on that front, and even for kids. And so they've come out with this great formula called Qualia Vision, which I've actually been using for a little while, and I feel like my eyes feel a little bit better. But you know, I've only been using it for a couple of weeks. But we talk about how they designed it, all the different ingredients, and why they make sense in this formula. We move on. We also talk about NAD, because, of course, you can't have a conversation about health and longevity without NAD, and how Qualia Life addresses NAD supplementation in people. And last but not least, we do touch on Qualia Night, which Greg likes to refer to as a nighttime nootropic. So it's a packed episode, as always. I don't think I told you much about Dr. Greg. Dr. Greg is a naturopath, as I said. He's also a published author. He's published a bunch of different papers. He's a speaker. He actually sometimes makes an appearance on the Collective Insights podcast, which I think is the Neurohacker Collective podcast itself. He's a great guy. This is actually the second time I've interviewed him, technically, but the first time was when I just had a YouTube channel. So that's an old kind of video you'll see from a couple of years ago if you're interested. And that one, we were talking more about Qualia Mind. So if you decide you want to give this a shot, you're going to want to go to neurohacker.com and use promo code NN15, NN15, and that will save you 15% off the price of your supplement. Cool thing about Neurohacker Collective, these guys are so confident in their formulas that they give you a 100-day money-back guarantee. So although the supplements are, you know, they're priced appropriately for what's in there, it can look a little bit expensive at first, but I got to tell you, they stand by their product and their stuff is amazing. If you get value from this podcast, of course, you know what to do at this point. Please leave us a review, share it with your network, with your friends, with your family, anybody who you think would get value from it as well, because that helps us to get the message out. And if you're looking to connect with me, you can do that through my website, which is natniddam.com, or you can find me on Facebook in the Optimizing Superhuman Performance group, or you can find me on MeWe, if you're not a Facebook person, in the Biohacking Superhuman Performance group. And of course, you can also find me on Instagram, just under my name, Nathalie Niddam. And if you're a video person and you happen to be listening to this, then you can actually also check out the video on YouTube. So actually, as you can see, you guys, I'm in a different setting for this introduction. I happened to be away. It was time to record the intro. So here I am. So anyway, thank you so much for being here. I totally appreciate you guys. Please keep the comments and the questions and everything coming because I love hearing from you, and enjoy the episode. Hey folks, just one thing before we get into the episode, and that is a word about our podcast sponsor this week, and that is Primeadine, made by Oxford Healthspan, which is the brainchild of my good friend Leslie Kenny. Primeadine is an incredible source of spermidine. Spermidine is one of the most incredible supplements that I have come across in a long time. It addresses 6 of the 9 hallmarks of aging. And this particular spermidine product is incredible for a bunch of different reasons. One, it's super clean. There's nothing but spermidine and prebiotics that will support your body's own production of spermidine in the capsule. It is a high quality wheat germ extract. And what they've done to make sure that it doesn't go rancid and go bad is they've defatted it. They've removed all the fat, all those delicate omega-6 oils that can be good for you in certain contexts. But once they go rancid, and they go rancid very quickly, it's anything but good for you. So Primeadine addresses 6 of the 9 hallmarks of aging, folks. Everything from the proper folding of proteins to autophagy to cellular communication, the proper DNA protection. Did I say autophagy? Anyway, 6 different hallmarks. If you follow me on Instagram, you can go look for a couple of posts I've written about spermidine, and you will see why this is a supplement that I include in my stack every single day. And frankly, it is part of the foundation stack for every one of my clients. So if you decide you want to give Primeadine a try for yourself, you're going to want to go to primeadine.com and use promo code BIONAT15 and you will get 15% off your supplement. And the last thing I'm going to leave you with is that not only is Primeadine doing all this incredible work under the hood to keep you healthy and rejuvenate your body and keep you youthful and vital, but on top of that, you're going to see it on the inside because you're going to grow stronger nails, better skin, and thicker, better hair. It is actually quite the most amazing thing. I haven't seen too many supplements where I've gotten so much positive feedback from my clients and from my group followers. So by all means, if you haven't given this stuff a try yet, you must, but you will know that it will take a good month or 2 before you start to see the effects and the benefits. So if this resonates for you, give it a shot. You won't be sorry. And now enjoy the episode. Welcome, Greg Kelly, to the podcast. It is so great to see you again. I think it's been 2 years since we last saw each other at Paleo FX.
Yes. Yeah. It would have been April of 19? That was the last one they held.
Yeah. And that was probably, you know what? That was the first video interview that I'd ever recorded with anybody. This short little, I think we did like a 20 or 25 minute interview that I ended up putting up on YouTube. And I looked at it the other day. I'm like, oh yeah, we did pretty well. I mean, not that what I do was so technical, but it was actually pretty good conversation. So anyway. Thank you for
when I've looked back at past things I've done, it's like, geez, I could have done a lot better.
Yeah, I rarely re-listen to anything that I do. Once I've done it, I hand it off to other people. I just save myself the agony of saying, oh, why did you say that? Or whatever the case may be. Anyway, it's the thing with us podcasters, right? So anyway, welcome to the show. I now have a real podcast. So I'm super excited that you agreed to come talk to me today, because I still love your product. And I just think that, we can never learn enough about, and you guys are always doing research. And I'm always so sad when you put out these emails that say, we're looking for 250 volunteers. And I'm like, me. I'm the kid at the back of the room going, pick me. And you're like, yeah, no, you're in Canada. We're not picking you. Like, come on. So anyway, but I keep hoping one day somebody will slip and send me stuff anyway. For people who don't know you, I mean, you've been the voice of Neurohacker Collective for a long time. You host your own podcast as well, right?
Neurohacker Collective has a podcast called Collective Insights, but we have 2 co-hosts, Heather Sanderson, she's an ND, and Jamie Weil. So his is more on consciousness. It would be his channel. And then occasionally I'll be like the guest host.
Oh,
so
nice.
Usually it's more related to a new product launch and someone wants to learn more about it. But yeah, so it's actually it's one of my favorite. I think Heather's voice, especially, I love having a smart woman being as knowledgeable and such as, a competent host as she is, because most of the podcasts I would listen to are the Dave Asprey's and the Ben Greenfields, who are fantastic, but it's nice to have that female voice interviewing some of those same guests.
Yeah, it's a different perspective, I guess. We have a different style. So, okay, so why don't we just very quickly, because we have a lot of material we want to cover. Sure. I've just crossed a few things off my list here. But why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey, how you came to be the dude at Neurohacker Collective that does all the cool stuff that you do?
Sure. I'm going to shrink this really, go through this super quick. But okay. So basically, I was an officer in the Navy in the 1980s, Reagan years. And around 80, probably like August of 88, I had to give a year's notice. That's just kind of how it worked, or you would get new orders. And at the time, I had just started, I'd been into eating well. I was the weird officer on the ship that would bring all his own food and decide, I all of a sudden started learning about Chinese herbs and yoga and a lot of things now we would bundle under complementary health or alternative medicine. And so I decided to get out and just kind of see what was out there. At that point I'd gone from, my parents being in charge of what I did to college, where everything was fairly organized, to the military. And in that time period, I made my way to Hawaii, started taking classes in Thai language and culture, and eventually got a grant to do a master's degree. And it just turned out that my emphasis ended up being on, my computer was just saying it was going to restart, sorry.
Oh.
So anyway, long story short, my master's degree ended up being in Thai, what I would call nutritional and medical anthropology. So how foods and herbs were used in Thai traditional medicine, which is very strongly overlaps with Ayurveda. When Buddhism came, Ayurveda basically came as well. And during that time period, I started taking a meditation class, met some naturopathic doctors, and it's wow, they're doing everything that I was trying to stitch together on my own. So I finished my master's degree, I was in the first class at Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine. Yeah, it was in Scottsdale, Arizona back in 93. And then, came out the funnel as a naturopathic doctor. I think it was my last year at Thorne, who's a pretty big name. Back then they were
the supplement company.
Yeah, Thorne Research.
Yeah.
They were looking to hire their first set of student reps at the naturopathic school. And, somehow I fooled them into thinking I would be the best candidate. So I started to go to, the different trade shows like environmental medicine and the anti-aging, my last year in naturopathic school. And then, when I first went into practice, I was also on the circuit, working for Thorne. And then on that circuit, Eat Right for Your Type was one of the hot books in that 96, 97 time period when I was going to a lot of conferences. And Peter Diadamo, the same, I fooled him into thinking that he would like me to work with him.
Oh, stop.
So anyway, so that my journey ended up, working with Peter in the height of his popularity, doing a lot with blood type, basically seeing all the new patients that funneled through. And at the time, his waiting list was over a year long. It was crazy.
Wow.
And then, so I subsequently stayed, still doing things for Thorne, so I've just been in and around, I think, more than the doctor end of the supplement world since the mid 90s. And with Neurohacker Collective, I got here in part because I'm a huge fan of complex system science. And I fundamentally believe that's the best model for understanding how our brain and body work. And one of the founders, Daniel Smachtenberger, he's a complexity science think tank guy. So it was just really appealing to come and work for a company where the underlying model wasn't more is better. It's let's try to figure out how all these interacting pathways are adapting to the world around them and see if we can come up with products that help support that.
Yeah.
So.
That's amazing. And that really is reflected in the products that you put out, because you're never, you're not putting out a 1 or 2 or 3 even ingredient product fundamentally, and I think people often miss that about you guys. They're like, oh, well, why would I want to take this? There's like 27 things in here, So, and it's like, I think a big part of it is not understanding this whole complex systems approach where, we were talking about this before we started recording, where there's so many different ways for the body. Like the body has all these built-in pathways to get to the same place. And I mean, it's part of the reason why as a species, I think we're so successful, is we don't have just one option. There's a lot of different ways to get to Rome or whatever it is.
Yeah, there's, so like I like redundancy. So that's redundancy is like a principle within complex system science. And so what you would see within, like repairing DNA or transcribing DNA or brain neural networks or even making NAD, there's always, for something important, built-in redundancy. And then there's checks and balances. So, the like fundamentally getting something up to a certain level is different than keeping it there long term. Right. And once you get it up there, there's usually a check to make sure, like, okay, I don't like this, my cells don't want it to go higher than this. So like what by virtue of me pushing it really high, now I taxing something else to prevent me from getting it higher. Right. So it's a lot more thoughtful, I think, when you start to, take into consideration that it's just not a more is better system.
For sure. Well, and the ability or designing something that helps to tap into those checks and balances as opposed to overwhelming them. And, in a way, we were kind of talking about that earlier too, when we were talking about NADIVs, which in a sense it's just this massive influx of this one nutrient or compound, if you will, that is a full-on override on the system. And it seems that certainly, I mean, in some cases, it shows huge benefit, like people with addiction issues and stuff like that. But, there's still a lot of questions on, whether we're going to call them high performance or longevity or biohacking enthusiast who's running in there thinking this is all sunshine and roses, even though it doesn't feel all sunshine and roses, which could perhaps be a sign. That it's not all sunshine and roses. But anyway, we weren't really going to delve into NADIVs so much. We have a list of things we're going to talk about. So I'm going to take it upon myself to get us there. And we're going to come back to NAD, guys, because at least in some ways, because of Qualia Life. But first, when we talked last week, just to touch base before, that was when there was this big announcement that the FDA was now making NAC a drug, and they were pulling the supplement off the market in the US, which of course has caused this insane stampede of all these people and health professionals to try and stock up as much as they can on NAC, which is everybody's sitting there going, well, what are you talking about? Like, NAC is this incredible nutrient. It's a precursor to glutathione. It helps my body to make it so I don't have to take glutathione. Makes all the sense in the world. And here's the FDA taking it away. And after the last 15, 16 months of mayhem that we've all been living through, everybody's going, crossing their arms going, see, I told you, they're just after us. They're just out to get us. And this is yet another example. And you presented me with a very different perspective on this. So I thought it might be nice to share it.
Yeah. So NAC, N-acetylcysteine, just in case there's some listeners that wouldn't have made that connection.
Oh, there might be.
So it would seem like it would be the definition of a dietary supplement in the US, right? It's been like one of the things here is if something was sold as a dietary supplement pre-1993, so that was when the Shea was passed, then it's grandfathered in. So there's usually nothing else you need to worry about. It's grandfathered in. It's always a dietary supplement. And NAC was definitely sold pre-1993. But where the issue comes in isn't that the FDA is a bad guy or they're doing something that's inconsistent with how they've approached things. So again, this is oversimplification, but there's basically like three categories of things. There's dietary supplements, there's drugs, and there's things that aren't necessarily in either. So think of the racetams, like those nootropics. Right. They're not approved drugs. They're definitely not dietary supplements. They're this gray area thing that's, just hovers, right? So NAC is interesting in that the FDA's position is that in the 60s, it actually became an approved drug. Like someone would have done the paperwork to file and get it approved as a drug, which makes sense. If you look at the really old NAC studies, it's because it's a mucolytic or like the glutathione connection and rescue for acetaminophen, right? It's still used in hospital ERs for that. So it's always been, from the FDA's perspective, in the drug category. And the big issue is that once something's in the drug category, the FDA does not have a mechanism to move it out of the drug category. So that's the same issue with CBD. Right. Someone petitioned a new drug application for it back around 2009, 2010. So that's what the FDA keeps telling Congress. Like, we don't have a mechanism to take something from that and now make it a dietary supplement, no matter how much you would like it to be and how much it's being sold as that. It's in our view, it can't be this because it's already that.
Okay, but then how's it been sold as a dietary supplement all these years? Were they not paying attention, or?
So that would be part of it. Part is like periodically they have opinioned that this isn't a dietary supplement. But what often happens, unless there's actions taken, their opinions are just ignored. And some of it also, I think, might be because like NAC started to get, like I saw it mentioned with COVID quite a bit. And so some of it might have been that. But basically what happened in the summer last year, I think it was July, they sent out warning letters to, a handful of companies or more and just said, essentially, we don't view this as a dietary supplement. So warning letters aren't an action in the sense that it's not saying you have to stop selling it, but it's just letting that company know this is our take on it.
I'm watching you. Yeah.
And so they still haven't made an official thing, but what happened recently is that Amazon, and so presumably probably Whole Foods as well, decided to remove anything with NAC.
Preemptively,
yeah. So there's the FDA hasn't said you can't sell it. And the truth is there's a lot of things in that gray category that are sold. That's why racetams you can find on Amazon or websites.
Yeah.
And so I guess like the simple thing is just think rather than conspiracy and the FDA is out to get us, it's more bureaucracy and they're just following their limited understanding of what they can and can't do.
Yeah. Although there's a teensy possibility of their attention being drawn to it because of people talking about using it for COVID. Because as a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure I know people were nebulizing it, right? The NAC.
There's also been some preclinical where it's been combined, I think, with a few other. Anyways, for sure, that COVID has been a very sensitive subject for the FDA. It's prompted more than warning letters.
Yeah. So, it's gotten people into a fair amount of trouble on a couple of occasions.
But so for me, though, it's just not a new thing, right? I think around 2013, they shared the same opinion just quietly. And the Council for Responsible Nutrition, which would be the advocacy group for the dietary supplement industry, they're taking a very different position, and they're working to get the FDA to change their mind. And so, at this point, I know what we did.
It's not over yet.
No. All they've done is
not a done deal. This is just. I see. So what it is it's Amazon and Whole Foods kind of going, yeah, we're getting out of the game while the going's good because we don't want to get stuck with a whole bunch of stuff. And it would just kind of.
Yeah, I would think it's more like a warning letter isn't the same as, so I would just use, my terminology might not be precise, but they've sent warning letters, but there's also what I would think of as an action where they contact a dietary supplement company and say, stop selling this immediately. A warning letter is more like, hey, this is our opinion on this and why we think this might not be, prudent to sell, but they haven't told you not to sell it.
Right.
Which is very different from like the early 90s was a very different time. Like supplement companies then, the FDA could, I know people that owned companies that the FDA came in unannounced and just, took all of some product off the shelves and said like, you're not selling any of this anymore. So a warning letter is not, anywhere in that same category. So I think it's Amazon being conservative. But Neurohacker Collective has also been conservative. So we have currently NAC in 2 products, our Qualia Life, which is our healthy aging product, and in our immune product. And what we did back, I did this probably in November, I reformulated those to remove it and replace it with L-cysteine instead, which is it's not as well studied as NAC, but it does most of the same things. And the truth is, most of the immune studies where L-theanine, which we think of as a nootropic, has been combined with something with cysteine for immunity, have used L-cysteine, not NAC. So, there are good human studies, especially for immunity with L-cysteine. So anyways,
nice.
I think
that's so interesting. It's a much more nuanced conversation than
most of them are.
Most of them are,
Like what ends up, like at least what I try to do is not be as tribal on things, right? Like rather than just taking one side initially, trying to like understand if there's a nuance here. And NAC, I think, will play out for a long period of time. Maybe not with Amazon; they seem to have already made up their mind. But at least with the Council for Responsible Nutrition and the FDA, I imagine this will play out over at least another year and a half before any actual decision is made.
Okay. All right. Well, so then there's still time. Although you guys may, that's an interesting concept that you found a workaround to pull the NAC out, to look for, is there it's a little bit like those redundant pathways, right? Is there another way to help the body to achieve the same goal, tapping into maybe a different pathway or another combination of products that will get us the same effect?
Yeah, and we're like on a regulatory speaking sense, we're a low risk company at this point in our, so our executive team has a low appetite to take on risk if it's not necessary. And, my feeling was, our formulas are still going to be as vibrant, making that switch. So it wasn't worth taking on what, frankly, we would view as low risk since it's still being worked out.
Yep. Okay. Amazing. All right. Well, that's the NAC discussion, guys. I've learned some stuff about NAC-cysteine, so I hope you did too. So we were going to talk about a few different products, and we're going to leave Qualia Mind kind of off the table today because we talked about it last time, and you've got a couple of really interesting, all your products are interesting, but we were going to talk about the Vision product that you have developed that is all about supporting eyes and resolving or supporting eyes with the issues of eye strain with screens, that kind of stuff, which I think, again, coming out of this year, and people who've never spent so much time in front of screens have been glued to screens. Kids have been glued to screens. So let's talk a little bit about what the issues are there and how you've gone about it.
So
you'll have an interesting approach to it, Greg.
The product is Qualia Vision. It launches mid-June 2021. So
coming soon.
Coming soon compared to when we're recording this. And so Vision's this weird overlooked thing that, in some countries, nearsightedness, so myopia, runs close to 90%. Singapore is one that I've seen that. In the US, it's probably like 40 to 50%, but it keeps increasing every decade. And the solution is, what I think of as palliative, right? Oh, it's corrective lenses or, aging eyes, maybe some kind of a corrective surgery. And then screen time is a completely different eye issue. And so so the first, what I think of as computer monitors, like I was at an engineering school in Boston in the early 80s, so even at that time we had, not like desktop computers, but monitors for computers hooked into the mainframe on campus. And those really made their way into the workplace in the late 70s. And literally within a year, there was complaints about what we'd now call digital eye strain, basically a clustering of symptoms related or that were being experienced by people that spent at least a couple hours a day looking at these monitors. And so that, like, digital eye strain is not a new thing, but it was a new thing that hadn't occurred with TV watching, or not to the extent that it was a thing. And so what's happened since that late 70s is, the TV technology's changed. Like, my TV set when I was in the Navy was a little black and white.
With a dial. You had to get up to change the channel.
And then, with smartphones and iPads and, even on laptop computers and others, the lighting, like the illumination they give off, is a lot brighter now than it was even 15 years ago.
For sure.
So what's happened is that one, technology has made screens put off a lot more light energy. And we've, like you mentioned, spent more time on them, like essentially progressively each decade. And this last year, it has just been crazy for a lot of people. Nielsen, the TV rating service in the US, it was March in 2020, in their survey, they estimated the average person, at least in their polled population, was spending just over 13 hours a day in front of screens.
Yeah. Well, and that's just TV. Because what's happening.
No, these were all screens,
all screens, including iPads and phones.
Yeah, and computers and
it's interesting. I interviewed a guy recently. His name is Jake Steiner. Have you ever heard of his organization? It's called endmyopia.org.
Oh, I've heard of the organization. Yep.
So that's his organization. He's based in the Philippines. He's got some really interesting information around this as well. And his comeback is that the eyeglass lens industry is not entirely as necessary as it needs to be. And, he explains the issues, and this is maybe different than the light, but that whole idea of fixing something, like fixing your eyes on something and creating some kind of a muscle spasm in the eye. And then, instead of changing your behavior, changing the way you do things to allow those muscles to relax again, just throwing on glasses, which actually make it worse and exacerbate the problem.
So the high level vision overview is you have the front of the eye, so the cornea, the lens, the back of the eye, which is the retina, and the retina is actually part of the brain.
Yeah.
So what ends up, the simplest sense is light comes in the front, the cornea blocks out some things like most UV radiation, hits the lens, and then the lens, there's a circular muscle around that.
Exactly.
Essentially changes its shape so that light will land exactly on the retina.
Right.
And when you think of things like nearsightedness, it's not landing exactly on that, which is usually then viewed, okay, well, we'll just correct the power of the lens. But part of the reason that's happening is, and this is again an oversimplification, but
that's okay.
Infants are not born with 20/20 vision.
Yeah, he talks about that. Yeah.
They learn to it because the eyes are essentially not seeing. It's the brain that's seeing. And it's that combination of eye-brain communication, that processing that allows us to see. And so what seems to be the case is, and it's called near work, so think of reading a book or looking at your phone or iPad, right? It's being held really near your eyes. When young kids do a lot of near work, it almost causes their brain to learn to be short-sighted.
Right.
Now, conversely, there's been a lot of studies where kids, even being outdoors for 60 minutes a day and spending time playing in that environment, which causes their eyes to have to, look far away, look near, right? Work it out much more holistically. That's one of the strongest things to prevent nearsightedness.
Interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
So that
working a muscle, right? It's allowing a muscle in its full range of motion.
Right. And that process of shifting our eye and keeping it in focus from far away to near or vice versa is called accommodation.
Right.
So that's the fancy term for it. But basically think of the accommodation as mostly that muscle that reshapes our lens to keep things in focus. And when we look at screens, what we're doing is we're literally wearing that muscle out, because the screens are a form of near work. And so that muscle, by the end of the day, is just exhausted. And you could almost say quivering, right? It's not, it's a smooth muscle. So it's different than our bicep, but yeah, like it will always be pulsating, but the way it pulsates is going to be very different at the end of a day, frankly, after even an hour watching a movie on an iPad than it would have been before that. Man, and then you also have two other muscle groups that are being hammered. So one is like the pupillary reflex. So the pupil, opens and closes to let more or less light in. And so that's also a muscle. It's actually attached to the same ciliary muscle that does accommodation. And that also ends up just quivering at the end of the day. It's exhausting. And then, like it's twitching almost. Right. That's not the precise thing, but it's like heart rate variability and heart rate being constantly varying. These muscles are constantly varying, but the way it happens, it just shows they're really fatigued by the end of the day. And then the last group of muscles, it's called convergence. But basically, to look at something near us, we have to rotate both of our eyes in.
Right.
So those are muscles that attach to our eyeball. Those also get worn out. So one big part of screen time is that we're just exhausting these muscles. Another then big piece would be blue light. And it's not like we're getting like huge amounts of blue light that in and of itself would be harmful. Like looking at sunset, we're probably seeing as much blue light, but the quality of it's different. Right. If we look at, the ocean or the sky, what we're seeing is light that's been essentially reflected and diffused.
Right.
When we're looking at a screen, it's coming directly at us with neither of those two things happening. Then screens also have like flicker, which that's exhausting. And so there's all these interrelating factors, the light intensity, the color of it, the eye muscles, that then cause most people to experience one or more symptoms that are just grouped in this digital eye strain. Right. So I think for the audience, I think of it just as like a couple main things, like the blue light piece, the muscle piece, and then the third piece is blinking is what keeps the surface of our eyes healthy and comfortable. And when we look at a screen, we're not aware of it, but our blink reflex really slows. So instead of blinking 20 times a minute, it may be 4 or 5. And so that, our tears have, lipids that lubricate the front of our eyes and antioxidants, and blue light on its own is stressful for the front of the eye. So between that stress and not blinking as much, the front of our eyes become really uncomfortable. So when we developed Qualia Vision, those were the things like, not just like blue light protection. Is there things we can do that will help with like the quality of tears and blinking, and that will help with these poor muscles that are just being worked to death? And so
that's so interesting. I mean, I think this segment needs to be taken out and sent to every new parent out there, because I mean, you see it yourself, right? I mean, the number of small children that you see, like as soon as they can, even before they can hold a screen, right? It's now they're in front of these iPads or iPhones or whatever the case may be. And like, sometimes you'll come across a new parent and they're like, oh my God, look at how little Joe can get in and out of apps. Like, isn't that so cool? He's only 3 years old. And it's like, there's a dark side to that. Not to mention the dopamine system, like all the other reasons why we want to limit that, but just the eyes alone is reason enough to, have like major blocks,
So like even like we'll just take the blue light piece. So some blue light is filtered before it gets to our retina. Some of that happens in our lens. As we get older, the lens yellows. So we essentially develop
our own blue light blocking.
But kids don't have that. Young infants, young children don't have that they haven't built that filter yet. And then we also have what are called macular pigments. So those are the lutein, the zeaxanthin that, so the photoreceptors, the parts of our retina that essentially capture and respond to light. That's where like vitamin A comes into the picture, or beta carotene. Before light gets to that, it essentially has to pass through this pigmented layer that I would just say, like, think of it like shade, right? So these other carotenoids, lutein, zeaxanthin, they're the ones that provide that shade layer. And so they're the natural filters for blue light. They're also really great antioxidants. So like when I think of carotenoids, and this, like, you know, it's humorous, but it really isn't, is like most people think of beta carotene as being good for the eyes or carrots, right?
Right.
And beta carotene cannot get into the eye. It can't cross that barrier.
No.
So, but these other carotenoids, lutein, zeaxanthin, they can. And so, like, you know, so you have carotenoids that can get in the eye, ones that can't. And most things in the body, there's some competition for. So carotenoids compete for absorption. And so taking beta carotene with these ones that you want,
it competes with the ones that you want.
Right? So you're actually making the ones you want less bioavailable. So when I see, you know, like what I would say is well-intentioned eye formulas that combine, you know, beta carotene with these macular carotenoids, it's like, wow, that person didn't really think this out very well.
Or they don't understand the full biochemistry of it all.
And then the other thing is, you know, beta carotene's only role in the eye is as provitamin A. But the truth is almost no one in US or Canada is vitamin A deficient.
Well, and also like most people are very inefficient at converting beta carotene into vitamin A, right? I mean, I've run, I don't know now how many genomic panels for people, and I'm not sure I've ever come across somebody that efficiently converts beta carotene into the form of vitamin A that the body actually can use. Yeah. So it's
and the other thing with so the way, like, blue light I mentioned can be irritating to the surface of the eye, right? That's more like antioxidants, oxidative stress, but it also can cause what's usually thought of as like oxidative stress to the retina.
Right.
And the reason is, so think of it as like a pigment. Vitamin A in the eye it would be classified as a pigment. The fancy term is chromophore, but like think of it as a light absorbing pigment. And when light hits that, it actually toggles the molecule and creates oxidative stress when it does. So blue light is the highest energy light that can hit our retina. It can get to the photoreceptors, in part because, like I said, the front of the eye does a great job at screening out UV. And the way energy works in, like, you know, when you think of the electromagnetic spectrum, is things with shorter wavelengths. You know, so those would be the blue end of the rainbow as opposed to the red end, have more energy. And more energy also means more potential for harm.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Like you don't hear about red light as being harmful, right? It's just a lot less energy in that wave. Where blue light, you'll sometimes see listed as high energy wavelength blue light or high energy blue light. And so what happens, like if you wanted to protect a mouse or a rat, and they're different than us, right? Because they're nocturnal and they don't have necessarily the same, they don't have the same color vision as us. They see in 2 color channels, we see in 3.
Right.
But the gist of it is creating a slight vitamin A deficiency is protective when they're exposed to blue light stress. Right? Because you're now like reducing the ability to create oxidative stress in the back.
Right.
So even vitamin A, when someone's exposed to a lot of blue light, at least based on animal studies, is probably not the most prudent thing until we know more.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so let's talk about your formula and how it supports the eye. Let's, because it's coming out soon. I mean, I'm a little pokey at, I like to record a lot of podcasts and have them in the bank. It makes me sleep. It helps me sleep at night. So I know I'm never going to wake up one morning and not have a podcast to release.
So it's,
so it's mid-June is the schedule, but let's talk about the formula, because I'm dying to hear what you put in there.
Talked about the macular pigment, so lutein and zeaxanthin, and there's a few, so what I think of in the supplement world, there's vendors that sell branded ingredients, and usually they've been the exact one that's been studied, and then, generic. And so for the lutein zeaxanthin combo, there's a couple that have been really well studied, but one called Lutamax 2020 has been studied specifically their emphasis has been on screen time, blue light, and things related to that. Nice. So they did a 6-month study. And Neurohacker, we're much more like a performance optimization company. So, where we tend to focus more on research that's in healthy people and getting them to perform better. Right. Where a lot of the lutein research is, aging, unhealthy eyes. So anyways, what Ludamax 2020 is, they had a study that usually it's called the blue study, but it was 6 months, young, healthy eyes, all had at least 4 hours of screen time a day. And then they measured a whole bunch of things related to digital eye strain, stress, sleep quality over both 3 and 6 months. And it rocked. It just did a great job. So that's one part of the formula. And like I said, those would be our natural blue light blockers. So super hard to get enough of those in the diet, especially if we're really stressing our eyes with blue light. Right. And the other cool thing about these macular carotenoids is they can also, just like they can get into the eye, which is a part of the brain, they can get into the brain. So lutein actually concentrates more than any other carotenoid in the brain, especially the visual parts of the brain. So they've also been studied for cognition. So that's one. Another one we have is a bilberry extract. And so bilberry reputationally, night vision would be like, it goes back to like stories in World War II about the UK fighter pilots using bilberry jam before their missions at night. Now, it's
really?
Yeah. So like the night vision is more, I would say, reputational at this point. There's been definitely studies that have suggested a benefit, others that haven't. But my guess would be it would depend on like the quality of your night vision. If it's already good, it's not going to get better. But if it's not, bilberry may be something that could help. But what bilberry has also been studied for is like, again, these digital eye strain complaints. And I think of it as something that helps the back of the eye. It's great antioxidant. The pigment is important for the back of the eye. But it also has been studied for both the muscles and the surface of the eye.
Right.
So it's more like this isn't in either or, but where lutein, zeaxanthin are much more retina and brain, bilberry is much more front of the eye and these like helping these poor worn out muscles. Right. So
nice.
So that's and then long term, like the other nice thing with bilberry and lutein, zeaxanthin, they've all been studied in kids. Actually, like a long-term study of bilberry going back quite a while helped kids improve some degree of their nearsightedness over a year.
Really? So the formula is actually safe for kids?
We
think, or
so all the ingredients in it are things that have been given to kids.
Okay.
So we would say, like, for sure, like if someone said, like, we're essentially selling it as something we're very comfortable with 10 years and older taking it.
Yeah.
Younger than that, like if my brother said I want to give it to my 6-year-old, I would, like, let me, like help you through this. So I wouldn't be concerned because of the safety of the ingredients.
Okay.
The other thing with bilberry, so we use, this wouldn't be interesting to most people, but bilberry has historically been one of the most adulterated plants in the dietary supplement industry. And it's because unlike blueberries that are easy to cultivate, bilberry is very difficult to cultivate. So most of it is wild harvested. So there's always, and this goes back to the 90s, there's always been more demand than availability. So because of that, there's a lot of adulterated bilberry.
Right.
So, in some cases, I'm completely comfortable going with a generic ingredient. But bilberry, we use, it's Myrtle Select is the branded ingredient name. It's the most clinically studied bilberry. I think they've done more than 60 studies on it. And it's like, for something like bilberry, I just personally wouldn't be comfortable not or buying an ingredient that wasn't branded and authenticated.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so we have bilberry, we have lutein, we have the zeaxanthin, those two being packaged up as the Ludamax. Is that?
Yeah, Ludamax 2020.
Right, 2020. Anything else?
Yeah, so we've got,
tiers?
so
you said something about tiers.
Yeah, so another thing we have is astaxanthin.
Right, which is phenomenal for so many things.
Astaxanthin, again, has been studied for digital eye strain, but it seems like its main action is in muscles. And astaxanthin's also been studied for athletes to help support their muscles, and probably some of the same mechanism. It's just really great for making mitochondria perform better.
Yeah.
So it really helps with the performance of these overworked muscles. We also then have, so in Ayurveda, their classic eye tonic is amla fruits, which
vitamin C.
Yeah, they're a great source of vitamin C and tannins. So that would be like almost what they call it a rasayana, which loosely translates as a rejuvenator. But it's the rejuvenator for what we would think is the eye and the visual part of the brain, and within, like, if you would translate their notion of it. So we have amla, and again, I would tend to think of that as much more of a front of the eye.
Yeah.
And then we also have goji berries, which is the traditional Chinese medicine eye tonic.
Yeah.
And, so that would be thought of as something that nourishes the eye. And goji is, at least as far as I can tell, the richest food source of zeaxanthin. So it has these, like, naturally has these carotenoids, but then it has other things that have also been studied for the eye. And so I think a goji looks like it's both the front and the back of the eye ingredient at this point.
Goji is interesting, because it got a lot of press at some point, and then all of a sudden people are like, oh, but it's a nightshade. So then it got the other side of the press. And I think it's one of those less is more foods. I think it's one of those things you don't want to be eating it pounding it by the handful, which people do, right? They're putting goji in everything, goji tea and goji berry salad and goji jam, like goji, no matter wherever you turn. And, never really thinking about how something that's so potent and so tiny, there's a reason why it's so potent and so tiny, and maybe a more tactical use of it might be more beneficial.
I think that's the way for most things. Honestly, so when slight detour, when I was studying Thai language, I got a grant to go to Thailand for a summer, take an intensive language course at the University of Chiang Mai. And my roommate was a Canadian professor at University of Chiang Mai. It was his house. And then a Thai gentleman that also lived there. And so do you know what lychee are?
Yeah, lychee fruit. I love that stuff.
So lychee would come into season, maybe it was like July. And then right after that was longan, Longan, dragon's eyes. They came in after, but they're a similar, small fruit that you peel and it's a white fleshy thing. And when one of those would first come into season, like some of my Thai friends would literally eat themselves sick, right? Including my roommate. So,
I've done that.
Yep. And so, I think, a lot of these things, it's, especially if we're taking them long term, we don't need to do these huge amounts. So that, like, goji's another. And then we also have ginger root. And the reason is, so about piperine being a bioenhancer.
Yeah.
So in that original study, ginger and capsaicin, the original study that looked at them as bioenhancers for carotenoids, and ginger performed essentially as well as piperine as a bioenhancer for these, carotenoid molecules, and has, at least in animal studies, effects on the lens and the front of the eye. So we put that in as both an eye ingredient and as a bioenhancer. Because again, I just think we want to do more to make sure we're getting, the most of these macular carotenoids into our system. And then we also have taurine, which nootropic, mood, sleep. It's in a lot of energy drinks, but it's the most concentrated amino acid in the eye, both in the retina and in all other parts of the eye, and actually does a lot as a blue light protective. So the more blue light we get, the more we're drawing on taurine.
Interesting. Okay.
And then the last piece is, so one of the things I always look for, especially with amino acids, is how much is in an average diet. So you have some things like L-tyrosine, glutamine, crazy high amounts, where we're talking 4 or 5 grams. You got tryptophan, which is 600 to 800 milligrams. So, almost like a step down from that. So much easier for something like tryptophan with what's in the supplement to move the needle.
Right.
And then things like taurine, it's more like 60 to 120. And like, a bodybuilder's diet might have 400, 500. So with a small amount, you can move the needle a lot. You could basically, for a vegan, completely satisfy their dietary requirements with a modest dose of taurine. And so we're a vegan company, at least in terms of, how we make our products, and certainly some of our clientele. So we put taurine in because of how important it is for the eye, and because the truth is most vegans have 0.0 dietary taurine.
Taurine, because it comes from red meat.
Animal products. Yeah, carnitine, right. Taurine, choline, creatine, those are just not things you're going to get much of on a vegan diet. So, which then my job is to make sure I'm filling in that gap.
Right.
For our customers.
Okay, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So you went with an oral supplement. Mm-hmm. Would eye drops ever be an option? Maybe not with every single one of those ingredients, but I know the eye is just like this living, incredible matrix, right? I'm curious, could there be someday an eye drop addition to the product that might help?
Definitely things like eye drops are soothing for the front of the eye.
Yeah.
But just like there's the blood-brain barrier, there's the blood-retina barrier, right? Okay. So things in the front of the eye aren't going to get to the back of the eye, right? There's two fluid-filled chambers sitting between those two.
Right. But even for feeding the front of the eye and addressing, the lubrication and that whole piece.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there are definitely things there. And even, I've seen some studies where polyphenols or things like that to the front of the eye can be comforting, right? Because it's a big part of that discomfort is we've just overburdened the natural protective mechanisms.
Yeah. And what's interesting is there's a couple of these repair peptides like thymosin beta-4, which is a repair peptide for the body, for muscles. It does, it's an immune peptide, does a lot of different things. But TB4 eye drops actually can be quite beneficial for certain eye conditions. And I want, as I'm thinking about it now, all this talk about muscles, I don't know. I mean, it's a pretty big molecule, honestly. It's I think it's 43 amino acids. So transdermal absorption at that level is pretty marginal, if at all. So I'm answering my own question. I can't imagine it would, but who knows if that's part of what's helping with the eye with.
Yeah. Well, and then the other thing is it's all connected, right? So even if something doesn't get to the back of the eye, the visual parts of the brain are still going to try to make sense of things. And anything you do that changes somewhere in that sense making is going to have ripple effects.
For sure. So, well, it sounds like an amazing formula. I can't wait to get my hands on some. And because, at this point, I spend so many hours in front of a screen every day. You get all these amazing seminars and webinars and things to watch at night. I can't get myself to do it. I just cannot add another hour. It just, if I'm sitting in front of a screen at night, it's like I'll watch 1 hour of a show and I'm wearing the darkest blue blocker. So I have, basically destroyed any kind of whatever the people making this show were thinking in terms of color and mood. I've pretty much demolished it because I've kind of blocked it all out. I'm doing my hour and I'm out, I just can't bring myself to spend any more time in front of a screen than I already do.
Yeah, I'm the same. My job entails being on a screen a lot. I like live sports, so that if I to enjoy that, most of that's my teams are all Boston teams. I live in California, so it means I'm watching them on a screen. And but another thing, just for our listeners, is there definitely are a few things that you can do to potentially get your screen time needs met and be less stressful. So one is the screen makes a difference. So a lot of we talked about has to do with near work. So a phone or an iPad that we're holding close is going to at least blue light aside, that's not going to be off the menu, but the muscles don't have to work as hard looking at something 7 or 8 feet away as looking at something a foot away. Right. So, rather than watching, your next bingeable TV series on your phone, TV would be a better call.
A better option. Yeah.
The other thing is, so what they it would normally be in a study about 2 hours to cause essentially eye strain symptoms looking at a computer. It's about an hour on an iPad or phone. So it's just a lot quicker to do it. And at least I've heard from a number of people, binging something on their iPhone has been the tipping point to all of a sudden cause a lot of like eye complaints that now that it's hard to get rid of. So, like the screen makes a difference. The other thing is like watching something with the ambient lighting being dark is actually more stressful than it being light.
Yeah.
So, looking at your iPad, like in your bedroom at night with the lights on,
dark
is way more stressful for the eye because the light that's allowed in, that's our pupil. And that's a much slower changing reflex. So it's trying to make sense of both what's in front of us and what's around us. And when there's a huge gap, it can't make up its mind. So we're just going to cause probably more light to come in because it's dark than it would if it was light, which isn't good, right? Because blue light's high energy. And we're also now causing that muscle just to like spasm because the lighting environment's hard to make sense of.
Never mind what you're doing to your poor pineal gland that was thinking it was going to make melatonin.
Yeah. So like blue blockers can be useful, but like choosing wisely what screen we're interacting with when we can, doing a better job choosing our like environment. And then the thing I do is on my computer, I just have an app that every 20 minutes reminds me to just for 30 seconds, take a break.
Nice.
And,
what's that called?
It's the one I use is called Timeout, but there's a lot. I mean, one point I had a list of like 5 or 6, but Timeout's the one that for whatever reason I settled on. On my phone, sometimes if I use my phone instead, it's I use Stand Up is the app.
Okay.
To
remind you to stand up. Yeah. Nice.
So it's a good, because otherwise, at least for me, it's easy just to like hour or two go by and not have like changed how I'm using my eyes.
Oh, listen, if you don't get those reminders, and I know this also when you do a really tough workout and you're a little stiff and you forget to get out of your chair and you go to get up after an hour and a half or something and you're like, holy geez, like I've seized. Or in my case, even like I'll find like if I'm on big days where I've been in front of my computer way too long and sitting for too long and I've ignored the things to stand up and do whatever, like I'll find it impairs my circulation, like my feet will swell, which is really unattractive and highly unpleasant and a really poor big reminder that, get your butt out of your chair. So.
And then the last tip in that 20, like say that every 20 minutes, the 30-second break, whatever people use, do something radically different with your eyes.
Yeah, look outside.
Yeah. So I'm fortunate. Right outside my apartment door is the Pacific Ocean. So like what I try to do is then see at a distance, like force my eyes to, both see really far away. And then Andrew Huberman talks about this. So he's a neuroscientist at Stanford that specializes in vision. Is we have basically think of like the main vision we're using when we look at a screen as being tunnel vision, right? We're like straight ahead. Yeah. And then we also have like what he would call panoramic vision, where like if we were hunter-gatherers walking in a jungle, our visual system would be as expansive as possible to detect movement either side, above or beyond. So what he would say is like when you take some of these breaks, practice on like this essentially wide panoramic type of vision, which usually means for me like this sense of relaxing my eyes and consciously trying to take in more of what's all around.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And, and it's interesting because in a city, it's a little bit harder to do, right? It's harder to get that long view that's not interrupted by a tree, another house, a car, like you're seeing things along the way. So really forcing yourself to look up at the sky and look out kind of thing that's really good.
And because what I've seen, people do is they'll take a break from work and then get on their phone, but that's not really a break.
Check their emails or Facebook or Instagram.
That's even more. Yeah. That's even more like near work, right?
Exactly. Okay.
So like use those breaks to do something that challenges your visual system in a very different way.
And preferably not through a window, right? Like, I mean, even the window is filtering light to a point. So trying
it will, but like
out the door.
Right now, when I look out my window, I mean, I can see, like white rippling in the distance. Sometimes I'd be able to see a sailboat. You're still causing the brain and the visual system to like now have to adjust that accommodation muscle.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But natural light would be like better to get some of, for sure.
For sure. Okay, so we're getting a little short on time, and I do want to talk about Qualia Life because we had a really super interesting conversation about it. So, so Qualia Vision, I'm down. I can't wait till it comes out. Qualia Life, and actually, let me ask you one last question about Qualia Vision. Is it because your formulas are often, let's just say they're so robust. So there's so many different things, and you're so good at getting the actual dose that you need into, because you can take 10, however many units of bilberry. If there's not enough, it's not going to get you to where you need to go.
Right.
How many capsules is it? Is it another multi-capsule formula?
It's like, actually our base recommendation is 1 a day.
Oh, you're kidding. Oh, wow. Okay.
And, so like as an example, Ludamax 2020 in the blue study that I mentioned, their dose was 24 milligrams. So 20 of lutein, 4 of the zeaxanthins.
Okay.
And, but they also did another study where they compared 12 to 24 and there's been a lot of lutein studies on that. So what we did in our development, we tested, one group with 1 capsule and one group with 2 capsules. And then we had them complete surveys of their digital eye strain symptoms. And we really expected 2 was going to work way better. And it really didn't. It worked marginally better, right? Like, we saw like, say for the 1 capsule group over a month, about a 70% reduction in their complaints. And in the 2 capsules, 79%, but wasn't like night and day difference. So like for me, since I'm on computers a lot, I guess what I would recommend for someone, if they haven't been taking like lutein, probably for the first month, take the bigger dose just to get the tanks refilled quicker. And then you're probably fine just taking 1 after that. And for like a teen, then I would just say 1 is plenty.
Right. So. Okay. Fantastic. Great. And for a little kid, because you were saying 10 years old, probably 1 is plenty. Okay, let's move to Qualia Life, because there's something about Qualia Life that I didn't know, and I think, maybe other people know because they've listened to other podcasts, but I missed those. And we were talking about the whole NAD conundrum, right? So how do we supplement to support NAD levels in the body? We know that they decline as we age. This is not a good thing. And yet it appears that maybe pouring buckets of NAD into the system may or may not be the best idea for most people. And so your formula, once again, you're going at it from many different ways. And so again, going back to this systems approach of supporting the body's ability to produce and recycle and support those salvage pathways, maybe downregulate CD38, which is this enzyme that just starts chomping through too much NAD kind of thing. Like you need some, but not too much. So maybe we could talk about that, because you've chosen 3 ingredients, niacin, niacinamide, and tryptophan, and left out NR in the cold. And so you mentioned why it may not be all that based on a couple of mouse studies. So in the 20 minutes or so we've got left, maybe we can just power through that piece.
Sure. So again, I mentioned early on, we're a complex system science, is like our model for how we approach things. And within that like construct, there's this idea, the simplest word would be just think of redundancy. For really important things that the brain and body does, there's always a built-in redundancy. And so NAD being so important for making energy and being essentially food for the sirtuin enzymes that are anti-stress, anti-aging enzymes, and DNA repair through another enzyme system, and supporting immunity through that CD38 route that you mentioned. So something that important, we don't leave it to chance and just have one way of making it. We have 3. And so one of those is like what we typically hear of as the NR or NMN pathway. So it's called the salvage pathway. But just think of that as that's the niacinamide pathway. So anything that has niacinamide in the name, or nicotinamide would, I guess, be the way it's normally said. So nicotinamide riboside, niacinamide, which is also called nicotinamide, or NMN, which is nicotinamide mononucleotide. So those are all in that same pathway. No matter where you enter it, they're all in that same loop. And then you have like niacin, like, the flushing vitamin B3.
Yeah. Has
its own unique way of coming into NAD. And that's named after the chemist that found that pathway, 60, 70 years ago, Price Handler. And then tryptophan. So the key thing to make NAD is the end part of the NAD, the nicotinamide part, right? That's the molecule, that's the limiting factor. And so tryptophan isn't nicotinamide. Niacin, nicotinamide, and all can be obviously readily made into that. But tryptophan essentially is called the de novo, but think of it as starting from scratch. It goes through about 11 steps, and eventually the output joins in that same pathway that niacin is in just before NAD. So you've got these 3 different ways that it's made, and different tissues rely unequally on those ways. So, in one tissue, maybe making it from tryptophan is the most important. In another, making it from tryptophan would only be a backup plan.
Right.
So anyway, because of that, when I look through all the NAD stuff, and I still keep my, finger on the pulse of the research there, I just don't understand why more people wouldn't think like, oh yeah, it's obvious. We should be given things that support each of these ways to make it, because they're all important. Right. As opposed to just saying, okay, NR is like the new sexy thing, so let's just give more NR and ignore these other 2 ways, right? So that's important. And then in all of these pathways, there's enzymes, right? So the reason that NAD decreases with age, someone would have to convince me that's because we're eating less of it, right? Like, it's not like all of a sudden, our input dropped 80%, but what we're making did, right? So that's now enzymes and the self-regulation of it. It's not lack of the resource per se. And so, like for me, when I design something for NAD, a lot of the support I would build in would be for these enzymes. So to nudge some to move faster, and like CD38, give it like a nudge to maybe slow down and consume a little less, right? So that you want to try to I don't think, I think thinking we can over control something, I don't think is realistic. There's too many checks and balances in it.
Yeah. No, but we're looking to toggle influence, if we will. Yeah.
And so like the key thing in salvage. So what I find fascinating is no matter how you build NAD in the first place, when it gets consumed by CD38 or sirtuins or DNA repair, all of those things, the leftover is niacinamide, so the nicotinamide, right? Like the old B3. So no matter how you made it once, you still have that as the leftover. And to remake it, which a big part of what cells do is remaking NAD.
Yeah, it's the whole salvage pathway. Like this is a renewable thing, right? Yeah.
Right. And so, that's why in life we have ingredients like rutin or great polyphenols and resveratrol, gynostemma, which is an herb from China. That's where it fits in. It's also why HMB, which is usually thought of as like for bodybuilders, is because that supports that recycling of it.
Interesting.
And then, you would know of AMP-K. I don't know if your audience would, but AMP-K is something that's also, in the same sense, sirtuins is a very interested thing in the longevity community. And AMP-K also works in that recycling pathway. So things like creatine and lipoic acid are really, useful AMP-K promoters. So you'll see all those things in the formula, like our Life product that usually, like if you would look at a classic NAD booster, it's got, one of the new niacins and then, maybe one other thing.
Interesting. So well thought out. So before we finish, you did mention that you'd done a couple of small trials with Qualia Mind and got some really interesting results because
with Qualia Life.
Qualia Life. Sorry. Because, Which I think is so interesting because it speaks to bioindividuality. Like not everybody's going to respond the same to the same product. So maybe you could just talk quickly about those two trials.
Yeah. Actually, if we have a second before getting there, you had asked why we left NR out. And again, that was
I forgot. Okay, yeah.
So it was for a couple of reasons. Like one, it's like NR is something that's made by Chromadex. They have the patent on it. So, when we made Life, they weren't willing to sell it to us. We could have put NMN in. So that was part of it. But part of it is, and this goes way back, is these are big molecules. And when we consume them orally, the breakdown of NAD in food starts to happen in our saliva. Mm-hmm. And by the time it's made its way to the liver, it's all been chopped up into the smaller molecules and reassembled. So with NR, like going way back, I've seen studies from the 80s that indicate NR is, unless you give like huge doses that overwhelm the enzymes in the gut, it's just all broken into N and R. And even one of the original studies that was published on it that looked, so what they would do for something like that with two molecules, they'll put an isotope on one, an isotope on the other, right? They'll double label it.
Yeah.
And then they'll track them. And what they found is very little of the NAD in the liver was because of both molecules getting there together.
Okay.
Right. So it did boost NAD in the liver, but so did niacin, so did nicotinamide, but not because it arrived intact. Mm-hmm. And then since then, there's been at least two other, studies that have done these double labeling and have looked at, in breast milk, in rats, in muscle tissues, it just doesn't get there in one piece. So it's getting broken into the cheap, like nicotinamide molecule way early in the process.
Right. So then you're just ending up with nicotinamide. So why not just take nicotinamide?
Right. Take that, what I would say, rather than spending a lot on this expensive ingredient that in my mind is unproven.
Right.
It does what it's been touted to do, and put those ingredient costs into things that help upregulate and do these other things. It's just more intuitively sensible to me.
Sounds like a plan to me. All right.
So anyways, the two studies.
So this is why there's no NR. Okay.
That's why there's no NR. Yeah. Is that because at this point, I'm just not convinced there's value. Like I think it boosts NAD, but these other things do too. And so one of the reasons I can say that is because we studied Life and measured NAD and then a bunch of other molecules in the NAD pathway on 9 people in December of 2019. And on average, we doubled whole blood NAD with our product over 4 weeks, which is like more than what NR has done, unless you give crazy high doses, like a gram of it a day.
Right.
And we also then positively influenced a lot of the other things in these pathways.
Positively influenced. That's a very nice way of putting it. But you were also talking a little bit about how there's a variation. So the average, you were saying like the average might be double, but there were people who were like super responders and people who were not so much.
Yeah. So again, this would be like a neurohacker or collective belief. Like we tend to think of there's different pods. So there's super responders, non-responders, and negative responders. And that you could pretty much make an argument for most things that there's going to be some people in every one of those groups.
Sure. I mean, we see it all the time, right?
Right. And so what we do is we try to shift it so we have more super responders than we would expect and fewer non and negative responders than we would. And if we can kind of shift things in that direction, then we feel like, okay, we've probably, no matter how much we continue to tweak the formula, we may change who the super responders are, but we're unlikely to get any more.
Yeah.
And so with, and even in the NR studies, in the human studies, in the few that have listed the individual participant responses, you see a huge variance in response. So you would see, some, what I would think of as moderate responders, some average, and then some super responders. And we saw the same thing. We had one woman that hers were 4-fold higher. And then we had a few people that was only like 35% higher, right? So there was just this huge variance.
And you have no idea why at this point. Like there's
even looking, No, like, and because it didn't match their behaviors. Like, so if you would just have said like, like who drinks a lot, who sleeps, like it didn't match those things. It was completely non-intuitive. So,
Yeah.
and we've been like, I've been in touch with a lab in Atlanta that has a home test kit for NAD.
Yeah.
And he's told me, like when, like someone where, like, as an example, NR hasn't worked, adding apigenin in, which would limit CD38, all of a sudden has made a big difference for them. So,
cool.
It's very individualized. Like, I think you and I would expect that. We know how much, genetics and polymorphisms play into our responses.
Yeah, for sure. And we may know some of those markers and still have no clue on what the others are, right? I mean, there's so much still to learn. Okay, well, that was fascinating. So that's Qualia Life.
We did one other study, and this was, have you ever heard of a device called the age meter?
Sorry?
Have you ever heard of the age meter?
No.
So it's newish. I think we were among the first people that bought it, but it's an iPad with an app that tests 12 things. So, some of them are cognitive, like reaction times, highest audible pitch, working memory, and some are things like, pulse oximetry or forced expiry. Like there's drawing a blank on the name, but basically like where you breathe really forcefully, right? So those apps are synced up to it. And so one of the things I did a 2-month study on life with 15 people for that. And one of the things that really shocked us is that highest audible pitch improved. So that basically it seemed like that's another thing that progressively declines with age, is our ability to pick up these higher frequency sounds. And over those 2 months, that improved. I think it was in 11 of the 15 people. So it was like interesting, but still very preliminary.
Huh. That is interesting. I love this stuff. I want to be one of those test subjects.
That one, I was having people come into the Neurohacker Collective office. I actually had more people recruited, but had to pull the plug on it when California closed everything down last spring.
Right.
So at that point, I just froze it. And, anyways, it's a device that lends itself to an office setting. And we got it originally in part because we do a lot with cognition. And so the reaction times and the working memory tests are just really for us to run on people before and after putting on a product we're developing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll never forget, and I don't know if I told you this, if I'd done it when we met, but I tested Qualia Mind on myself using an EEG machine.
You did tell me. Yeah, I think that was when we met in Toronto at the Biohacker.
I broke open the capsules and drank it, which was nasty. It's highly unpleasant, but so interesting to see specific parts of my brain responding differently than the next person or the next person and the next person. And there's really no real reason to believe that any of these other supplements in some capacity, I mean, some more than others, maybe. I think like the way the brain responds is maybe even more refined than NAD pathways, let's say. But I think anytime you can land on technology or a device or something that can give you insight into individual responses to these things, it's like crack, right? It's like, ooh, how many people can I bring in? So,
yep.
Okay, well, this has been amazing. We've talked about most of the things we were going to talk about. We didn't talk about the sleep one at all, but we'll get to that another day. We'll talk about it. It's going to get its own podcast. How's that?
Yeah. Well, we're actually, maybe we're planning to do a clinical study on it probably in the fall. So maybe, at some point we'll get results back from that. We can, but yeah, it's an interesting product because it's not something that you would take just before bed to help you fall asleep. It's really dinner time to help essentially our brain and body get into a more relaxed state so that we can get better quality sleep later when we choose to go to bed. So it's, like I think of it as a nighttime nootropic. So
yeah, no, it's interesting. And I find for myself that even a lot of the sleep formulas, I do better if I take them 2 or 3 hours before bed. And I mean, part of that is I'm a slow metabolizer of melatonin, which I'm sure comes into play as well. But I definitely, and I do think that part of what's interesting about Qualia Sleep, is it called Qualia Sleep?
Night,
Qualia Night, is that in a way, it almost gets people thinking about going to bed earlier. And can that help them to create a better, kind of lead into bedtime so they can actually fall asleep, which is, that whole sleep hygiene thing that people like me who are coaches are harping at people about. And people are like, yeah, I'm just going to wear my blue blockers and pop my pills. And you're like, no, it's just not going to happen. Like, it's not going to work. So having a supplement that gets people maybe thinking about it at dinner time, maybe there's a piece of that as well, just kind of setting yourself up and getting that going. So anyway, you're not responding because you know that we have to end. So
yeah, I think you're right. Like a lot. So I mean, my simple metaphor for like falling asleep is that the sleep is like a bus, pulls into the station like every hour, maybe 2 hours, somewhere like on a schedule. If we're aware, like we feel sleepy and noticed it coming into the station, that's our opportunity to get on board.
Yes.
But if we miss that bus, we don't just get to like say, okay, now I'm ready. Like, where are you, boss? Like, we have to.
It's not coming back. Yeah.
Right. And so, like, part of like I pay very close attention to when that sleepiness sensation starts to come on, and that's no matter what I'm doing, that's when I close up for the day and go to bed. But most of the people I've worked with over the years, that has not been the case. So one of the things with taking Qualia Night 3 to 4 hours before, I think it can make that sleepiness signal be stronger because we're more relaxed. Like it's standing out from like what typically makes that signal drown in the noise is hyperarousal, like that wired and tired feeling.
Right.
So that, like night's much more oriented around things like reishi and ashwagandha and gotu kola that are like brain herbs, but ones that are in that calming, relaxing category.
Nice. So. All right. Okay. Save that for another day, Mr. Kelly.
Sure.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you again so much.
Thank you for having me.
It's been great chatting, and let's not wait 2 years again for the next one.
Sounds good. Thank you, Nathalie.
Thank you.